containment pod hissed as Magistrate Velshar approached, her 6 eyes adjusting to the dim laboratory light. Inside, suspended in preservation gel, sat what humans called a sandwich. 2 slices of processed grain product, compressed animal protein, a green leaf substance, and a red paste that triggered every biological alarm her species possessed. "The casualty count?" she asked without turning. Her assistant, a young scholar named Trenvok, consulted his datapad with trembling claws. 17 dead, 30, 2 in critical stasis, all from the boarding party that seized the human merchant vessel. Velshara's mandibles clicked softly. The humans had surrendered without resistance, handed over their cargo manifests, submitted to inspection protocols. The only unusual element had been the human captain's final words before being escorted to detention. "Tell your soldiers not to touch my lunch." Standard defiance. Meaningless bravado, except 3 hours later, the medical bay had erupted in chaos. Warriors who had laughed at captured ration supplies were convulsing. Some had already dissolved from the inside out. She circled the containment pod slowly, studying the deceptively simple construction.
"The toxin analysis?"
Concentrated beyond anything in our records. Trenvok's secondary arms fidgeted with his equipment. The substance bonds with neural receptors, causes immediate system failure in our biochemistry. Even trace amounts through skin contact proved fatal. But Magistrate, this makes no sense. Explain. The human crew had these compounds in their galley, multiple variants. Different colors, different intensities. They were eating them. Velshara's meditation chamber had prepared her for disturbing revelations, but this exceeded parameters. She'd spent 40 cycles studying human behavior, physiology, psychology. They were soft creatures. No exoskeletons, no venomous defenses, no electromagnetic sensing organs. They breathed a corrosive oxygen mixture and died from minor temperature fluctuations. Yet here was evidence of willing self-poisoning for recreational purposes. "Show me the surveillance footage again." The holographic display materialized between them. The human captain sat in his command chair. Average height for his species. Unremarkable features. He reached into a container and withdrew the sandwich. Even in the recording, Velshara's chemoreceptors twitched at the memory of the substance. He bit down, chewed, swallowed. No hesitation. No protective equipment. No antidote preparation. A small smile crossed his face as he continued eating. "Analysis of his biometrics during consumption?" Velshara asked. "Elevated heart rate, increased perspiration, endorphin release in the brain chemistry. All consistent with human pleasure responses." Trenvok zoomed the display, highlighting the red paste dripping from the sandwich. "Magistrate, they've weaponized their own food supply. This cannot be accidental." Velshara considered the possibilities. The Galactic Council had classified humans as Category 5 intelligence, clever enough for basic space travel, too primitive for real threat assessment. But Category 5 species didn't develop immunity to neurotoxins through casual dietary choices. "Bring me the human captain." Magistrate, protocol requires now. Security escorted the human into the laboratory 15 minutes later. He moved with the casual confidence that had marked his species since first contact. Not the swagger of warriors, but something more unsettling. The ease of someone who genuinely didn't understand they should be afraid. Captain Marcus Chen. Age 43 standard cycles. No military background. A freight hauler carrying agricultural supplies between the outer colonies. Nothing in his record suggested tactical training or strategic thinking. Yet he had managed to poison 17 of her best soldiers without firing a single weapon. He studied the containment pod and actually smiled. "You guys found my lunch. Is this about the refund policy?" Velshara gestured to the holographic display showing the casualty reports. 17 dead, 30, 2 critical. "Explain why your sustenance killed my people." The smile faded. Chen studied the data with what appeared to be genuine shock. "Wait, they ate my sandwich?" Trace contact was sufficient. Jesus. Chen ran his hand through his hair, a human stress indicator Velshara had catalogued. "I tried to warn them. I said not to touch it. Insufficient warning for a biological weapon." "Biological weapon?" Chen's voice rose sharply. "That's a hot pepper sandwich. It's lunch. The peppers are literally called Trinidad scorpions." I figured the name might be a hint. Trenvok stepped forward, antennae bristling. "You admit to weaponizing toxins?" "I admitted to having hot sauce on my sandwich." Chen looked between them, expression shifting from shock to something else. Understanding.
"The kind that came when patterns suddenly aligned."
You're serious. Your people can't process capsaicin. It dissolves our neural tissue, but humans eat it for fun. Correct. Chen was quiet for a long moment. Velshara watched him process the implications. Humans had survived as a species by developing resistance to compounds that killed other sentients on contact. Not through genetic engineering or technological enhancement, through simple, sustained exposure across generations. They'd poisoned themselves until they developed immunity, then made it a recreational activity. How many similar compounds exist in standard human diets? Velshara asked quietly. Chen met her gaze. Do you want the short list, or should I just give you access to our agricultural databases? Velshara's 6 eyes fixed on the human captain with new assessment protocols initiating. The Galactic Council had classified his species incorrectly. Not Category 5. Something far more concerning. Chen seemed to realize it too. His expression shifted again, this time to something careful, measured. Magistrate, I think we need to have a much longer conversation about human food safety standards. The containment pod hummed between them, holding a sandwich that had killed more efficiently than most military-grade weapons. Velshara's mandibles clicked in what humans might have recognized as grim amusement. The galaxy had just gotten considerably more complicated. In the observation deck above, medical teams continued desperately working to save the warriors who dismissed the captain's warning as meaningless bravado. None of them had understood that humans didn't make idle threats about their lunches. They simply stated facts and assumed others had the sense to listen. That miscalculation had proven fatal. Velshara turned back to the human. Tell me everything about your food. Captain Chen pulled up a chair without being asked, another casual boundary violation that somehow didn't register as disrespect. Just practicality. This might take a while. I have allocated resources. Okay then. Chen settled into the seat, that unsettling ease radiating from every movement. Let's start with why humans started eating poison in the first place. It's actually kind of an interesting evolutionary story. The human began explaining, and with every word, Velshara felt the galaxy's power structure shifting in ways the Council had never anticipated. Because if humans could turn their lunches into weapons without even trying, what else were they capable of? And more importantly, what did it mean that they genuinely didn't seem to understand how terrifying that was? The containment pod continued its quiet humming, preserving the evidence that would force the Galactic Council to completely reevaluate everything they thought they knew about the species from Earth. Because humans didn't just survive in a hostile universe. They'd apparently made it significantly more hostile just by showing up, and they'd done it with a sandwich. Captain Chen continued his explanation, occasionally gesturing at the holographic displays Trenvok pulled up, showing molecular structures and biochemical pathways that made even the advanced Velshara species seem suddenly primitive, not because the humans understood more about chemistry, but because they'd learned to survive compounds that shouldn't have been survivable. The key thing to understand, Chen said, pointing at a capsaicin molecule rotating in the holographic display, is that humans actually feel pain from this stuff. It's not that we're immune. We just trained ourselves to enjoy the pain. Tranvok's antennae curled backward in distress. You deliberately inflict suffering on yourselves? For flavor, yeah. Chen shrugged. It releases endorphins. Makes us feel good. Plus it kills bacteria, preserves food, and gives meals more complexity. Win-win. Velshara filed that information alongside everything else she'd learned about humans in the past 40 cycles. They were a species defined by contradictions. Fragile yet resilient. Peaceful yet perpetually war-ready. Sociable yet intensely territorial. And apparently, they'd turned self-poisoning into a form of entertainment. How many other toxic compounds do you humans consume regularly? She asked. Chen considered the question. Depends on your definition of toxic, I guess. There's alcohol, which is literally a poison that we metabolize for recreational intoxication. Caffeine, which is an insecticide that we use to stay awake. Theobromine in chocolate, which kills most earth mammals but humans process fine. Various alkaloids in spices, tannins in tea and wine. Should I keep going? Please. The list continued for 20 minutes. Compounds that would trigger immediate evacuation protocols in Velshara's medical facilities were casual ingredients in human cuisine. Foods that would require hazmat containment in galactic ports were sold in human grocery stores. Even their children consumed substances that would hospitalize trained warriors. Velshara's understanding of galactic threat assessment protocols began restructuring in real time. The Council evaluated species based on weapons technology, military organization, industrial capacity. Standard measurements for standard dangers. But humans represented something unprecedented. They'd bypassed traditional evolutionary safety mechanisms entirely. Where most sentient species developed caution toward toxic substances, humans had apparently decided to eat them until they stopped being problems. It was, Velshara realized with growing unease, the most aggressively optimistic survival strategy she'd ever encountered. "The Council needs to know about this," Trenvok said quietly. "The Council needs to understand what this means," Velshara corrected. "This isn't just about food safety warnings." Chen shifted in his chair, expression carefully neutral. "What does it mean?" Velshara turned her full attention to the human captain. All 6 eyes focused, mandibles still, every gesture calculated for precise communication. "It means your species has been systematically training itself to survive in environments that kill everyone else, not through technology, not through genetic modification, through willpower and repeated exposure. I mean, when you put it that way, it sounds way more dramatic than it is. Is it inaccurate?" Chen opened his mouth, then closed it. That calculating look returned, the one that suggested his species wasn't as oblivious as they pretended. "No, I guess it's pretty accurate." "Then help me understand. What else does humanity consider normal that would be lethal to other species?" The human captain took a deep breath, and Velshara recognized the expression that crossed his face. It was the look of someone realizing they'd been operating under incorrect assumptions, that the baseline they'd considered universal was actually uniquely dangerous. "Okay, so this might be a longer conversation than I thought," Chen said slowly, "because if capsaicin is that bad for you guys, we've got some serious problems." "Explain." "Our terraforming protocols, the agricultural exports in my cargo hold, the colonization standards we've been sharing with other species." Chen's expression grew more troubled with each word. "We've been modifying planets to match Earth's environment, making them more habitable by our standards, which means you've been weaponizing entire ecosystems without realizing it." "Oh, God." Chen stood abruptly, pacing the laboratory. "The Viridian colony. We sent them drought-resistant crop varieties last cycle. Those plants probably produce defensive compounds that would be lethal to Viridian biochemistry." "Yes. And the atmospheric processors we sold to the Ketrine Collective? Likely catastrophic if they match human oxygen preferences." Chen stopped pacing, hands pressed against his temples in a gesture of stress that Velshara recognized from her human behavior studies. "This is a diplomatic nightmare. We've been accidentally poisoning the galaxy." "Not entirely accidental," Velshara corrected. "You warned my soldiers not to touch your lunch. You simply assumed they would understand why. Because who eats random food from an alien species without checking? Warriors trained to believe humans are primitive and harmless." The words hung between them, heavy with implication. The Galactic Council's classification system had created exactly the wrong set of expectations. Humans seemed harmless because they lacked obvious weapons, primitive because they'd only recently developed faster-than-light travel, non-threatening because they died easily from temperature changes and minor injuries. But those assessments had missed the fundamental truth. Humans came from a death world that had tried to kill them for millions of years. They'd responded by eating the things that poisoned them, breathing the corrosive atmospheres that dissolved other species, and training themselves to survive through pure stubborn determination. They were survivors who'd turned survival itself into their primary weapon system, and they'd done it so thoroughly that they'd forgotten it wasn't normal. Velshara accessed her Neuralink, opening a priority channel to the Galactic Council. This couldn't wait for proper diplomatic channels. Every human colony, every trade agreement, every cultural exchange program needed immediate review. Council Magistrate Velshara requesting emergency session. Priority level absolute. Classification species threat reevaluation. The acknowledgement came within seconds. The Council recognized her security codes. Understood that she didn't trigger emergency protocols lightly. 20 of my warriors are dead from a sandwich, she transmitted. And I've just learned that humans have been terraforming planets to match their poison world standards without realizing other species can't survive their improvements. We need to reconvene immediately. Chen watched the exchange, his human features showing appropriate concern. What happens now? Now we determine whether humanity is a Category 5 intelligence that's dangerously ignorant, or something far more concerning that's been strategically hiding its capabilities. We're really just trying to ship vegetables between colonies. Your vegetables contain neurotoxins. Yeah, okay, fair point. Trenvok approached with fresh data scrolling across his datapad. Magistrate, I've accessed human agricultural databases as the captain suggested. The preliminary scan is troubling. How troubling? 83% of standard human food crops produce compounds classified as toxic by galactic safety standards. 67% would require hazardous material containment protocols for transport, and 42% are listed as controlled substances or outright banned in council space. And humans eat all of these? Regularly. Some are considered delicacies. Velshara turned back to the containment pod holding the sandwich. Such a simple thing. 2 pieces of processed grain, some compressed proteins, plant matter, and sauce. The kind of casual meal that workers across the galaxy consumed without thought. Except this casual meal had killed trained warriors and triggered a galactic crisis. Captain Chen cleared his throat. Look, I know this seems bad, but humans have been trading peacefully with other species for decades. We've got established colonies, diplomatic relationships, cultural exchanges. If we were actually trying to weaponize everything, don't you think someone would have noticed? Or, Velshara said quietly, you've been so effective at normalization that nobody questioned why human spaces require different safety protocols than everyone else's. Chen had no response to that. The laboratory fell silent except for the quiet hum of analysis equipment and the distant sounds of medical teams still fighting to save warriors who'd touched the wrong lunch. Velshara felt the weight of discovery settling across her consciousness. This wasn't just about food safety. It was about recalibrating humanity's position in the galactic hierarchy.
They weren't primitive. They were specialized.
Adapted to survive conditions that killed other species as easily as breathing. And they'd been quietly exporting those conditions across known space without anyone realizing the implications. The Council would need to make decisions, adjust treaties, revise trade agreements. But more importantly, they'd need to stop underestimating the species that turned poison into lunch and forgot to mention it was dangerous. Because underestimation had already proven fatal. The containment pod hummed. The sandwich waited. And somewhere in the galaxy, millions of humans were probably eating their own versions of carefully weaponized meals without realizing they were engaging in biological warfare. Velshar's mandibles clicked softly. The universe had just revealed a new kind of predator, one that didn't hunt with weapons or strength, but with lunch. And that was somehow more terrifying than any weapon system she'd ever encountered. The emergency council session convened within the hour, representatives materializing in holographic form around the central chamber. Velshara transmitted her findings with clinical precision, watching as species after species processed the implications. The Ketarine ambassador, a being of crystalline thought patterns, flickered with distress. We have 17 human agricultural advisors currently terraforming our outer colonies. Recall them immediately, Velshar advised, and quarantine any modified environments until proper biochemical analysis can be completed. But the humans have been helpful. Their terraforming techniques are revolutionary. Because they're optimizing for death world conditions. That silenced the protests. Captain Shen stood to one side, escorted by security but not restrained. He'd cooperated fully, providing access codes to human databases, explaining biochemical processes, even offering to contact Earth's diplomatic corps directly. Yet Velshara sensed his growing unease as the scope of the situation expanded. Humans had spread across dozens of systems, established colonies, shared technology, integrated into galactic civilization, all while carrying their poison world standards with them. Ambassador Thexfor of the Progenitor Alliance materialized with their usual commanding presence. This council should have been informed of human biochemical tolerances during first contact protocols. Humans passed all standard safety evaluations, Velsara responded, because we tested for weapons technology and military capacity. We didn't test for dietary neurotoxins. An oversight that has proven fatal. Agreed. Which is why I'm recommending complete species reevaluation. The holographic representatives murmured among themselves, creating a cascade of translated communication that filled the chamber with overlapping concern. Velshar waited for the noise to settle before continuing. The humans aren't deliberately hostile. They're negligently dangerous. They've evolved to survive conditions that kill other species, and they've forgotten that isn't normal. Every cultural exchange, every trade agreement, every shared meal is a potential biochemical hazard. Chen raised his hand hesitantly. Can I say something? He looked uncomfortable under the scrutiny of multiple species, but his voice remained steady. You're talking about humanity like we're some kind of threat, but we're not trying to hurt anyone. We just want to be part of the galactic community. You want to be part of a community you're accidentally poisoning, Ambassador Thexver said coldly. Only because nobody told us our food was dangerous to everyone else. You should have known. How? Chen's frustration finally broke through his careful diplomacy. How are we supposed to know what's normal for species we've never encountered? We used Earth as our baseline because that's all we had. When the Council cleared our colonies for settlement, we assumed that meant our environmental standards were acceptable. When nobody died from trading with us, we thought everything was fine. Until my warriors touched your lunch. Yeah, and I warned them not to. Chen's voice rose. I specifically said don't touch my lunch. Those were my exact words. Not vague. Not unclear. Don't touch this thing. And they ignored me because they thought humans were too primitive to be dangerous. The chamber fell silent. Velshara felt the shift in the room's energy. Because Chen was right. The Council had approved human expansion, established safety protocols, conducted inspections. And at every level, they'd approached humanity with the condescending assumption that a species from a single planet couldn't possibly pose sophisticated threats. That condescension had created blind spots. Fatal ones. So what do we do? Asked Councillor Vrentis, speaking for the first time. The elderly harmonist rarely engaged in council debates, preferring observation to intervention. But even they seemed shaken by the implications. We cannot simply quarantine humanity. They're integrated into too many systems. And you can't force us to change our entire civilization to match galactic standards, Chen added. We can't just stop eating our own food. Then perhaps, Velashara said slowly, we stop treating this as a human problem and recognize it as a council failure. All eyes turned to her. She felt her mentor protocols engaging, the deep training that had made her a magistrate in the first place. Problems weren't solved through blame. They were solved through understanding and adaptation. We classified humanity based on incomplete data. We approved their expansion without proper biochemical analysis. We treated them as primitive when they were actually hyper-adapted to hostile environments. These are council errors, not human malice. You're defending them? Ambassador Thexvor asked incredulously. I'm stating facts. Humans passed our safety test because our tests were inadequate. They poisoned my warriors because we didn't believe they could be dangerous. They terraformed planets to Deathworld standards because we approved those standards without understanding them. Velshara gestured to Chen. The captain warned his food was dangerous. We simply didn't listen. The chamber remained quiet as representatives processed her assessment. Velshara knew she was taking a political risk. Her own warriors had died. She had every justification for demanding human accountability. But accountability without understanding solved nothing. I propose revised protocols, she continued. Comprehensive biochemical analysis for all human settlements. Mandatory safety training for any species interacting with human environments. Detailed labeling requirements for human agricultural exports. And most importantly, formal recognition that humans represent a new classification category. What category? Councillor Vrentis asked. Velshara considered her words carefully. This would define how the galaxy interacted with humanity for generations. Adaptive survivors from hostile origin environments. Species that have optimized for survival conditions lethal to standard galactic life. Not deliberately dangerous, but requiring specialized protocols for safe interaction. That's a very diplomatic way of saying we're walking biochemical hazards, Chen muttered. Yes, okay, fair. Ambassador Thexfor flickered with what might have been reluctant agreement. The proposed protocols would be expensive, time-consuming, and politically complicated. Less expensive than the alternative, Velshar countered. Because if we don't establish proper protocols now, this will happen again. More warriors will die. More colonies will fail. And eventually, someone will decide humanity is too dangerous to coexist with. The unsaid implication hung heavy in the chamber. Extermination protocols existed. The Council had used them before against genuinely hostile species. If humanity became classified as an existential threat, those protocols would be invoked. And judging by Chen's expression, humans understood exactly what that meant. We'll cooperate, the Calkin said quietly. Whatever protocols you need, whatever testing, whatever modifications to our settlements, we'll do it. We don't want war. War might be inevitable if this situation isn't managed correctly, Velshara said. Not because humanity wants conflict, but because fear makes species irrational. My warriors died because they underestimated humans. Others will overreact and attack preemptively. We need to prevent both extremes. Councillor Vrentis nodded slowly. The magistrate speaks wisdom. We should vote on the proposed protocols. The vote proceeded with surprising efficiency. Fear motivated cooperation more effectively than diplomacy ever could. Within 30 minutes, the council had approved comprehensive new safety standards for human interaction. Velshara's recommendations became official policy. It wasn't perfect. Nothing ever was when dealing with galactic bureaucracy. But it was a foundation. A framework for coexistence between humans and species that couldn't survive their casual lunches. As the council session concluded and representatives began disconnecting, Velshara approached Captain Chen. Security had relaxed slightly after his cooperation, though they maintained careful distance. The human looked exhausted, the kind of bone-deep weariness that came from realizing your entire species had been accidentally dangerous. "What happens to me?" he asked. "You'll be released. Your cargo will be held for analysis, but you'll receive compensation. And the council will probably want you to participate in the new safety protocol development. Because I'm an expert in human biochemistry now? Because you understand both perspectives. You know what humans consider normal, and you've seen what happens when those standards interact with other species." Chen laughed without humor. "I just wanted to haul vegetables between colonies." "Your vegetables contain neurotoxins." "Yeah, I know. You keep mentioning that." He rubbed his face tiredly. "This is going to change everything, isn't it? Humans won't just be another species anymore. We'll be the dangerous ones everyone has to be careful around." "You were always dangerous," Velshara said quietly. "You just didn't know it. Now the galaxy understands, and we can develop appropriate precautions." That sounds like isolation. Or it sounds like respect. Fear and respect look similar initially. Which one it becomes depends on what humanity does next. Chen considered that, his human features showing the complex processing his species was famous for. They thought differently than most galactic species. Faster in some ways, more intuitive in others. It made them unpredictable, which added to their danger profile. But it also made them adaptable.
"We'll make this work," Chen said finally.
"Humans are good at adapting. We kind of had to be." "I know. That's why you're terrifying." The human smiled at that, a genuine expression without the careful political calculation. Just honest amusement at the absurdity of accidentally poisoning the galaxy. At least we're memorable. That was never in question. Velshara watched as security escorted the captain out, his casual confidence slightly dimmed, but not broken. Humans would survive this diplomatic crisis the same way they'd survived everything else, through stubborn determination and the ability to eat poison until it stopped being a problem. The containment pod still hummed in the laboratory, preserving the sandwich that had triggered a galactic reevaluation. Velshara made a note to have it transferred to Council archives. Future generations would need to understand how close the galaxy came to underestimating humanity into catastrophe. Because that sandwich represented something far more significant than just dangerous food. It represented the fundamental truth about humans that the Council had missed during first contact. They were survivors. Aggressive, adaptable, and utterly unwilling to accept that environments were supposed to kill them. Instead, they developed immunity to death worlds, and forgotten to mention it was impressive. That kind of species didn't conquer through military might. They conquered through persistence, through the quiet confidence that if something could kill them, they'd just eat it until they developed tolerance, and then they'd put it on their lunch. Velshara's mandibles clicked in what might have been respect or concern, probably both. Because humanity had just reminded the galaxy that danger came in many forms. Sometimes it wore armor and carried weapons. Sometimes it smiled politely and offered to share its carefully weaponized meals. The Council would adapt, establish new protocols, learn to coexist with the species from the poison world who'd turned survival into an art form. But Velshara suspected they'd never quite look at humans the same way again. And somewhere in the galaxy, millions of humans continued eating their lunches, blissfully unaware that they'd just revolutionized galactic threat assessment with a sandwich. That, Velshara decided, was perhaps the most human thing of all. They'd changed everything without meaning to, simply by being themselves. Dangerous, persistent, and casually immune to things that killed everyone else. The galaxy would never be the same. And honestly, Velshara wasn't sure if that was terrifying or impressive. Probably both.